We are live. Go ahead, Jack.
Great. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jacqueline Harris, and I am delighted to welcome you to our ACYPL virtual town hall today. Last week, our panel of speakers discussed the economic stimulus, examining the intention and impact of federal legislative efforts, the politics of the response, and the road ahead for political leaders. Today, we'll continue that conversation by discussing the impact of COVID-19 on state economies. We'll discuss unemployment, pension programs, and state priorities to grow the economy. With Congress now back in session this week, and with the extended tax filing deadline now behind us, we also can't help but wonder what the COVID-19 federal relief legislation might look like and what support could be delivered to state governments. There's no better time to discuss state economies and the realities that elected officials are facing in the wake of COVID-19, and our speakers today are experts on the subject. Joining us, we have the Honorable Allison Ball, Kentucky State Treasurer, who traveled on an ACYPL exchange to Hungary and Croatia in 2017, and the Honorable Micheal Frerichs, Illinois State Treasurer, who traveled on an ACYPL exchange to Australia in 2017. Treasurers, it is a joy to have you here today. Would you please introduce yourselves, speaking to your careers to date and experience in elected office? Treasurer Ball, let's start with you.
Great, thank you very much. Well, as you heard, I'm Allison Ball. I'm the Kentucky State Treasurer. Just a little bit of a background on me. I got reelected to my second term last year. I've been in for now in my 5th year. I've gotten to see a few things now. I've been around for a little while. Previous background, I was a bankruptcy attorney. I practiced it in my home area in Eastern Kentucky. I'm from an area that is rural. It's about 2 hours away from the nearest city. And I'm 9th generation from this particular county. So I'm deeply rooted in those mountains. My family's been there since the 1790s. I really wanted to go back and practice law. That had been something I wanted to do because I love my community. I love where I'm from. And while I was doing that, I was, like I said, mostly practicing bankruptcy law. I also did about 4 years as a prosecutor. I really began to develop an interest in just solving financial problems. I've always liked policy. I like economics. And I began to sort of look at the state treasurer's office, and I felt like it had been underutilized for a long time. So I ran for office. I'd never run for anything before outside of student government. When I was in law school, I was in the Student Bar Association. So that was it, the first time I'd ever run for anything. And I like to tell people that it's a great thing to do when you're young because you don't have a lot to lose. I wasn't married yet, didn't have any kids, and it was something that I thought I could make a difference on. I thought, why not? I'm going to give this a try. So we have 120 counties in Kentucky, and traveled all around the state. I planned out my income enough so I could keep working and campaign as much as I could. I ended up being the top vote getter 5 years ago now. So it turned out well. All that hard work paid off, and then I actually was the top vote getter again last time around. So that I think part of being a treasurer lends itself to that kind of work. You can pull from both sides. It's very nonpartisan type work. It's nuts and bolts. It's very much about being good with your money, and that can appeal to a broad spectrum. And it lends itself well to my background, what I'm interested in. So it's a tremendous job. It's a privilege doing it. I love to do it. I've had some personal milestones while I've been in office. I got engaged about 2 months after I got elected. My husband proposed on Valentine's Day, just after I got sworn into office, and we got married that October. So we were planning a wedding while figuring out how to serve in office. I really left most of the wedding details to my mom. She was great. She stepped in and took care of most of it. And then 1 year, 9 months, and 3 days later, we had our son, Levi, who just turned 2. And when Levi was born, I actually became the first constitutional officer in Kentucky history to have a baby while in office. There have now been 2 others that have done that. So it's kind of neat to see generationally what's happening as women who are younger who are getting involved, and men are younger and getting involved. So I just love to see kind of a generational shift where we're not waiting for people to be older before they step up and want to serve in office. We're starting to see more young people, and we have just a broader spectrum of experience doing it that way. So it's been neat to kind of be the first in that. When I was elected, I was the youngest woman in the country to serve in a statewide elected office, and I held that distinction for about 3 years. It's not true anymore. But those are some experiences that I've had while serving in office. I love the job. It's a tremendous privilege and honor to do it. And I never expected to be doing it in a crisis like we're experiencing right now. but it's something I asked for. You know, I said I want to be here to serve Kentucky, and it's a privilege to serve in this time as well.
Great. I'll take over from there. For my colleagues in my Japan trip, I also have to point out that I was on an ACYPL delegation in 2011 to Japan. In case they're on board here, they would be really disappointed to hear that I was only in Australia. My background in some ways is similar to Treasurer Ball's. I grew up in a small town, about 800 people. My parents both grew up on the farm. They were both born on the farm, not in hospitals. My parents didn't go to college. Their parents worked the land and dropped out in 6th, 7th, or 8th grade. So I'm the second generation to attend and graduate high school. My path is probably your typical path to becoming a state treasurer. I went away to college where I majored in German studies. I used that to go to Taiwan, where I taught English and studied Chinese. I came back, I worked on Wall Street for a little while before taking a fellowship in public affairs in St. Louis. I came home, I started an engineering company, monitoring bridges for structural integrity. That led into becoming county auditor in 2002, got elected to the Illinois State Senate in 2006, got elected to my first term state treasurer in 2014, re-elected in 2018. So your typical path for a chief financial officer. Obviously that's a joke, but what they all have in common is they were things that excited me, things that challenged me, and because I was interested, I threw myself into all of them, and then people would come to me with suggestions of something else I should do, such as my advice for people. There's no one career path to one particular career. Find something you love, be the first person into work, the last one to leave, work all day with a smile, ask for more work to put on you, and people will want to work with you. So I got here.
Thank you so much. Now, because I find context is always helpful, to kick things off, would you please give us an overview of your state's government structure, your primary responsibilities as state treasurer, and beyond that, a sense of your state's economy before COVID-19? Treasurer Frerichs, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, our state government structure is not too dissimilar for every other state. We have a governor, we have a House and a Senate. I guess that makes us different from the state of Nebraska. But the real sort of difference that I see day to day is in our office. And Treasurer Ball can tell you this as well, that if you've seen one state treasurer's office, you've seen exactly one state treasurer's office. We all have different responsibilities out there. So if you know what your state treasurer does, they may be doing things differently than we do in Illinois or in Kentucky. Well, one thing most all of us have in common is we're the chief investment officers for our state. We invest the state's resources. Now, I will sometimes get asked, well, but then what do you do all day? I said, well, I invest the state's money. And they'll say, but you work for a state that has no money. What keeps you busy all day? We have over 700 different funds with fund balances. Our general revenue fund has a big backlog of bills. There's not a lot of cash sitting in there before it goes out to pay those bills. But over 700 dedicated state funds that build up fund balances. In Illinois, oversee about $13 billion in state funds. We also help municipalities and units of government invest their money through a pooled asset program. We oversee about $6 billion in funds there. And something that gets me most excited is we help people invest in themselves. One of the best investments you can make in your family is in a college education. And we oversee our state's 529 college savings plans. There's about $13 billion in funds invested there. We, within the last few years, have set up a retirement savings program, a program for people with disabilities called ABLE. We're in charge of financial literacy, and we're in charge of unclaimed property. This is money that belongs to you that's been sitting in a bank or a company. We take that and try and find its rightful owners. Now, those are some of the things, I know, investments and unclaimed property that we share with Kentucky, but if you go to other states, one of our neighbors is in charge of 911 services. I know another state that's in charge of the lottery. Some are in charge of debt management. I am not. Some have a greater role in budgeting. That's really the General Assembly and the governor's role here in Illinois. So the brief answer is that's some of the things we do in Illinois government, our responsibilities in the Treasurer's office, but they're different wherever you go.
Treasurer Ball?
So Treasurer Frerichs knows that there's a famous saying among treasurers: if you've seen one treasurer's office, you've seen one treasurer's office. There's a lot of differences from one treasurer's office to the other. We do have some overlap with Illinois. Just kind of a background structurally, what is Kentucky like? Again, we do have a governor, we have a state senate, we have a state house of representatives. So we have that kind of structure, but we have a very strong separation of power structure. And it's always quoted whenever there's a lawsuit involving something like this: we're supposed to have the strongest separation of powers in the country. And it may be sort of apocryphal, but the story is, I believe that Madison or Jefferson, one of those founders, came over and kind of learned from what happened federally and decided they wanted it to be stronger in Kentucky. So the understanding is we have a very, very strong separation of powers. And that impacts what my office does because we have separately elected constitutional officers. So you've got the governor and lieutenant governor, they're elected as a ticket, and then everybody else, like the treasurer, is separately elected. So we don't have a unified executive. There are some states that do. Some states still have people that are elected, but there's also an understanding of it being unified. Kentucky's not really that way because you can have different parties in those different positions, and they're expected to be strong executives to stand up for what that role is supposed to do. So that has always led me to explain my office as being a watchdog. That's my role, as a watchdog on our state's dollars, our taxpayer dollars, and I describe that as being something that I do where I check and make sure whatever comes out of my office is legal, is constitutional, is in line with regulations. It just has to be the correct payment going out. And if it's not, then it's my job to stop it. So it's led to me stopping some embezzlements, some areas where spending was supposed to go out that when we looked at it, it really wasn't technically legal. So I've really tried to emphasize that's the core function of my job, is that watchdog on our taxpayer dollars. All the money in Kentucky goes in and out of my office, and that's the core function. With that, there's also a lot of additional responsibilities that are similar to what the Treasurer of Illinois does. I'm also in charge of our unclaimed property. I'm in charge of our ABLE accounts. We call them stable, and those are 529A accounts for people with disabilities. I also am on a board that oversees our 529s, which are the savings accounts for people to use at the university level, or they can also use it while they're in school, for private school or something like that. And then there's a bunch of other boards. So I sit on the Kentucky Teachers Retirement System Board, which deals with that pension system. I sit on our lottery board, which deals with funds for our education. Our State Investment Commission, which oversees all of our investments. Our Assets and Liability Commission, which deals with, of course, a number of our state debt. So various different financial matters I'm a part of. And that's kind of just a quick overview of what happens in the office. We balance the books. We make sure all the checks for unemployment go out. I'm the point person for our relationship with the IRS. I'm the point person for our relationship with our banks. So I'm that kind of that financial person that everything goes through for Kentucky. Kind of give you a snapshot on what it is that I do on a day-to-day level.
Well, thank you.
The other difference is I represent the state of Illinois, not a Commonwealth. Now, what difference that makes, I don't know. Maybe Treasurer Ball could tell us.
We feel like it's a vast difference, although I'm not sure I could explain it to you.
Okay.
So focusing a little bit on COVID-19, the economic impacts of COVID-19 were realized almost overnight. And for an office that I imagine maintains a fast pace in normal times, could you walk us through some of the challenges you were faced with at the onset of the pandemic? I mean, what were those first few weeks like, and how, even from an operational standpoint, did you adapt to address the very urgent needs of constituents in your state? Treasurer Ball, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Well, the first problem that we faced, which is the same one that everybody who has an office faced, was how do we get people out of the office and still be able to do the work? And we had some emergency plans set in place for if something ever happened, something bad ever happened, we'd be able to manage it. But nothing was actually set up for a pandemic. We didn't anticipate that one, and probably we should have, probably the whole world should have. But our ideas were about what happens if we have a fire? What if there's an earthquake? What if we have an active shooter? Those kinds of things. We didn't think about what do we do if there's a pandemic. So, we had to get people out of the office quickly. We deal with things that anybody in government does. There's a lot of bureaucracy and there's red tape and challenges, and we put in orders right away for computers to get people out. And we ended up just having to send people home with their desktop computers originally, because we had to get them out and we had to make sure we were operational. And of course, we have a lot of things that have to be done within the office. So we wanted to do teleworking as much as we could, but we have to write checks and we have to check the mail. And we actually just had some things that had to be done within the office. So we had to figure out, okay, how are we going to do this and keep people as safe as we possibly can? We had to ramp up our cleaning within the office, of course. And a number of state government offices are cleaned by inmates in Frankfurt. And then we had a really high rate of infections within inmates. So thankfully, our office was not one of the ones that we'd ever used inmates. We have a lot of high security information, so we felt like we wanted to make sure we were secure as we possibly could. But some states where some offices were looking at, hey, we're using this population, and it's a population that has a really high infection rate. So it was an exciting, interesting time for the first month and a half or so, just figuring out how do we get people out of here and how do we telework. So it took some innovation and creativity, but we were able to be operational. And of course, those first few weeks, it was like, what are we seeing with our investments? Because everything plummeted really, really fast. And we're trying to figure out, well, how do we be good stewards and make good decisions when it comes to our investments while we're watching all of this go down? And then of course it's adjusted now and we're not having that problem. But for a while there, we were looking at that, like, what are we going to do? How are we going to make good decisions? I remember getting some calls, frantic calls from friends within the banking community because they were concerned there was going to be a run on the bank. So they were wanting to make sure that there was just really wise, cautious messaging coming from government. And so, we had to have very quick discussions about what do we do that's making sure we're not scaring people, but we're handling this the right way. So, it was just a flood of information coming in, and every day felt like it was about 3 days long, having to make new decisions very, very quickly. And especially figure out, who's somebody who's in a vulnerable community within our office. How do we protect them and make sure we're maintaining operations? I really, really wanted to make sure we were focused on unclaimed property because that was one thing that could be considered to be non-essential, but I wanted to keep it operational because it gets money back to people. And that was when we weren't sure if people were just going to be losing their jobs across the board and have no income at all. And I wanted to make sure that we were getting those funds back to people. So we had to be very creative to figure out how do we do this and keep this operational and keep it safe. So that was a major, major commitment on my part that it could have been pushed to the side because it wasn't necessarily considered to be essential. But I said, this is something we've got to keep going.
Treasurer Frerichs?
Yeah, we had some bad news, and I think we had some good things going in our office as well when this happened. The bad news is we were the first state to have one of our first state office to have one of our employees test positive with COVID-19 on March the 14th. So that required us to shut down our office immediately. That was a bit devastating, but it was mitigated by the fact that I think because of my experience in Taiwan and travels in China, we started a few years ago an internship program with students from China coming and working in our office. And we had students in our office in December and January, and they were a little bit of a canary in the coal mine for this crisis. As we were hearing about how things were progressing in China, we decided early on we were going to shut down our internship program. We're going to have anyone new from China coming over. We thought, we're not shutting down travel. People are still going to come over here. The virus is still going to spread. What are we going to do if it affects our state like it had Wuhan and other parts of China? So in February, we started sending employees home with laptops and cell phones, testing out their internet capabilities, working through some of the bugs and glitches to make sure that we could conduct our financial transactions safely. So we had started doing this in teams, different weeks, sending people home for probably 3 or 4 weeks. So when we got that news about our employee, we told everyone to go home. We set up at a new location, giving out laptops to those who hadn't received them yet, and immediately continued our operations. Now, it's very different, but our numbers have actually been good. We've seen some increases in our unclaimed property claims filed since then. We've seen an increase in the number of college savings accounts opened since COVID hit. So things that are under our control seem to be going okay. But I don't want anyone to think everything's okay. We're seeing a devastating hit to our incoming revenue. We've seen an increase in our expenses, especially healthcare related, just like every other state out there in the country. I think later on in this interview, Treasurer Ball and I are going to talk about things that are unique in our states, but every state has been impacted here. Maybe your state got hit a little later than other states, but it's had some devastating consequences. And not to sound melodramatic, but I think we're looking into an abyss here that could rival the Great Depression. You know, I know people say that maybe dramatic, but if you work in the hospitality industry, if you work for the Hotel and Lodging Association, and you happen to be an ACYPL alum, we're trying to do what we can to help out the hotel industry with some grants, but we have limited resources here in the Treasurer's office.
Sure. Thank you. And it's actually a natural segue. I was wondering if next we could speak a little bit about some of the tough realities that you're seeing across your state, and specifically with regards to unemployment. Treasurer Ball, could we start with you?
Yeah, so Kentucky was very hard hit when it comes to unemployment. For a while there, we had the highest claims in the country. I don't think we have the highest claims right now. I think that's been adjusted somewhat. But if you calculate all the numbers, we had about 40-some%, like maybe 43% of our workforce in Kentucky file unemployment for about a 4-week period of time. So that's a massive, massive, massive population of your workforce that's filed unemployment. We have about 4.4 million people in Kentucky. It's not a very big state, and over 1 million people had filed for unemployment. So that takes a really strong hit very quickly. And it's been one of the greatest concerns that I've had because that is worrying for the future. You know, are these people going to be able to go back to work? You know, it's one thing if this is a temporary situation and we've just got to figure out what do we do to keep things going for a little while. It's entirely another thing if those people end up not having jobs to go back to. So that was one of the things that I was most concerned about when I first started watching this, because like I said, we're the ones that cut the checks for unemployment. We don't process the claims. That comes from the governor's office. But once those claims have been processed, we then send out those checks. And that was actually one of the most demanding things that we had during the first 2 months, because we were watching our funds, because there's a certain amount of funds that are supposed to go for unclaimed property, or sorry, for unemployment. And they were dipping down and down and down. So we were having to make sure, like, do we have funds there to be able even to pay these checks? So we had people that were just working late hours to make sure that we had the funds, we could write those checks, and then we would mail them out. So I saw early on quickly, these are really high numbers. These are worrying numbers. We need to be very alerted to this. And we've had challenges in our state because there's been a backlog. So not only have we had high numbers, but they've not been processed very, very quickly. So you have people even currently now who filed in March who still haven't been processed yet. And they usually call my office, and I do what I can to be of assistance, but that actually is done over in the governor's office. And so, you know, we put the pressure on them that we can and try and facilitate those things being processed. But it's been a tremendous challenge as I've watched those numbers increase, and I get these calls from folks who are concerned. And it's always a sad, challenging story about someone who, you know, single mom, and they're not sure they can pay their rent, and they filed back in March and they haven't gotten it yet. And just these heartrending stories of folks that are still a part of the backlog, and the backlog still isn't taken care of. It's something that's an ongoing thing, and we keep putting pressure where we can to make sure those backlogs get taken care of, because we stand ready to send out those checks once they're processed, once they're ready to go. But it's a really serious issue here in Kentucky. But I know that anyone who's listening knows that it's serious where they are too. It's not just here. We've had high numbers here, but it's not just here. But I actually just this morning was reading some publications, and I read that there was 1.4 million first time unemployment claims filed in the United States. So those are people that haven't even done it for the last 5 months. So we know this is a very, very real problem, and it's continuing, and it's something that we need to be very aware of, because it's not going to be I don't think a short-term problem. I think it's going to be a long-term problem.
Yeah, and I don't think it's a problem that's unique to Kentucky, that backlog of people out there, people frustrated, people angry, people scared. They're around the country. That 40% number was scary, and I don't think we've hit that. But in June, our unemployment rate in Illinois was 14.6%. In context, a year ago, it was 4%. And that sort of seismic movement has been seen in other states as well. Some are worse than others. States like Nevada that rely so much on the tourism industry, or Hawaii, I think have been hit harder, but it's really been felt all around the country. And I know you'll have a lot of elected officials listening to this. I had a very scary conversation yesterday with the National Association of Treasurers, and one of our colleagues told a story about someone being pulled over with a car full of explosives and detonators and plans to go to the treasurer's office because they were frustrated with the unemployment insurance process. And that colleague of ours, just like in Kentucky, Illinois, isn't in charge of unemployment insurance. We don't make those decisions, but because our names end up on the checks, there's a lot of animosity and a lot of phone calls directed our way. But, you know, that's not just us. They also told a story about during the last recession in 2008, 2009, a woman who was appointed interim director of the state unemployment fund in Nevada made it a few weeks before all the death threats got to her and she resigned. So I don't want to minimize the pain, the frustration, the sadness, the depression people are feeling or going through this. But for elected officials out there, just be aware there's a lot of anger and there are people who are misdirecting that. So that was a little chilling yesterday to hear.
Oh, it absolutely is. You know, you mentioned it earlier, there's a lot of uncertainty right now, and it's difficult for anyone to predict what's around the corner. However, state and local budget cuts do appear to be inevitable. And I wonder, what will the impact of state and local budget cuts be for state and local employees, institutions, and could you specifically speak to pension plans? Treasurer Frerichs, let's start with you.
Well, there's a lot of uncertainty, and my hope was the next 3 to 4 weeks we'll have a better idea. Every state, I think, has seen a hole blown in their budget, some larger than others. The Illinois General Assembly this spring came together and chose to use borrowing authority made available by the CARES Act, which is about $1.2 billion in loans, with the understanding that there's most likely going to be some federal help to states. Now, depending how large that is, the state may not have to make as dramatic of cuts. I think it's pretty clear they're going to have to make them somewhere, but they didn't want to make $5 billion worth of cuts and find that the federal government will be giving our state $3 billion down the road. Also on that call yesterday, our lobbyists in DC were saying it's looking more likely we might get some sort of agreement out of DC it's second week of August. And so that means in terms of unemployment insurance, those who were relying on that extra $600 to pay their rent, to pay bills, there's almost certainly going to be disruption there for those people. But in terms of help for the states, I think the Democrats and Republicans are jostling right now and putting forward their proposals separately. I think the Democrats in the House nearly 2 months ago put forward a $3 trillion bill reflecting some of their priorities. Over the last few days, you've had Republicans arguing amongst themselves about what should be included, but I think you're probably going to see something in the $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion range. But what I have heard is that's unlikely to include much, if any, money for state and local governments. And I just want to make a plug, if there's anyone there listening out there, I think that would be devastating for our economy. Because although I can't tell you the level of cuts or exactly where they'll be in Illinois, if the federal government doesn't do anything, we're required to ultimately have a balanced budget. We don't have the ability to long-term borrow for operating expenses. We don't have the ability to print money. And there will be massive layoffs. There will have to be massive layoffs if that happens. And at a time when the economy is already precarious, that would be compounded not just in our state, by 49 other states, by units of local government laying people off. There'll be reduction in services, but it'll be another big increase onto the already full unemployment rolls. And so I think it's very important that the federal government does something because they have the ability to run deficits. They've done it for a while. They have the ability to basically print money. And to really sort of answer your questions, I think we'll have a much better idea in the next 3 to 4 weeks. And it's highly dependent on what the federal government does. And I believe the
well,
leader
there's
of
a
the
lot
Senate
that can be said.
in the same state as Treasurer Ball. She might be able to better answer that question.
I don't know. There's a lot that can be said in answer to that question. And you also mentioned pensions in particular. So I just kind of want to touch on that first. That's a problem that we've had in Kentucky. And of course, we share that problem with Illinois. We may be the two worst. I don't know. The two.
We're definitely both in the bottom 3 or 4.
Yes, we're definitely in the bottom of that list. So we have a major problem with unfunded liability. So this is, money, and this is a sophisticated audience, but this is money that we've promised to state workers that that we don't have. And so we're in a difficult situation. We started this in a difficult situation. We have 2 major pension programs in Kentucky. There's one for just general state workers, the KRS program, and that's about 13% funded. And when I say that to folks, they're usually shocked, and they should be shocked. That's a very scary number. Our better one is the one for the teachers, and that's the one we feel good about, and that's the 58% funded one. And this tells you there's a problem when you feel really good about your one that's 58% funded. So this was scary before any of this started. This was a problem before any of this started. And there's a variety of reasons for why we got here. One of the reasons is that it's very important that you make the required payments into these programs. Just like if you're paying your mortgage on your house, you have to pay that, and it goes to the interest and the principal. And so we had several years where we really weren't paying that. You dig yourself into a deeper hole. That's part of the problem. We have about $11 billion budget, and last year, $1 billion of our $11 billion budget went to pensions. So it's a huge chunk of what it is that we pay. We pay about, last year, I think it was 84 cents on the dollar, so 84 cents additionally for every single one person who works in state government in the KRS program. It's 83% this year. So you almost double any state worker. That just tells you that's the cost of a state worker in Kentucky. If you're making $25,000, it's going to cost almost $50,000 to pay for that state worker. That's where we're at in Kentucky. So it's a serious problem. It's a serious problem in Illinois. It's a serious problem in many, many other states. So that's part of the environment that we're looking at right now as we look at what do you have with your budget. And, have we been hit economically? Of course we've been hit economically. Everybody has been hit economically. Are we going to have lost income in the future? Yes, we're going to have lost income in the future. I think that's standard across the board. It's to be expected right now. Some good news is the governor said that it looked like the numbers weren't, he said this yesterday, the numbers weren't as bad as we thought for this last fiscal year. So that's good. We were looking at about $500 million that perhaps we lost last year, and we're not at that right now. But we are anticipating a major loss, and perhaps it's as much as $1 billion for the coming years. We're looking at what we're having. So all of that impacts several policy decisions right now. And one of them I think just can't be overlooked is the importance of reopening the economy, because you do depend as a state on your revenue. And it's not just for paying pensions or other things, but for example, the road fund is a big issue. And I think all states are funded by some kind of road fund where the taxes from usage of paying for gas goes to repairing the roads. And it was a little worrying for a while because people weren't driving. Gas dropped enormously. So you weren't getting as much on what they were paying, and people just weren't going anywhere. And they're not really going to go anywhere if they can't go to work and they can't go to the doctors and do the things that they need to do. So all of these things are a strong reminder, I think, of the importance of opening the economy as safely as possible, as quickly as possible, because you depend on that to be operational, to pay for road repairs, to pay for your teacher salaries, for things like that. Are we going to have budget cuts? Yes, I'm sure we're going to have budget cuts. Is there going to be money coming in from the federal government? We know as of this morning that there's going to be some funds coming in from the federal government. We also know that it's not going to go to pensions, probably, because Republicans have said, there's going to be a negotiation agreement, but at least Republicans have started off saying they don't want these funds to go to pensions and they don't want it to go to rainy day funds. So, and it's probably going to be possibly CARES money that's already been spent. So again, that's going to leave the pension problem. It's not going anywhere if we end up in that position, and we may end up in that position come first or second week of August when they finally do reach an agreement and vote on this. So all this tells us Kentucky's still going to be in a financially precarious position, and it is important that we start making good decisions when it comes to reopening the economy. That's got to be part of it. And it's not always bad to have to reevaluate things. We've done that within my office, and one of the things we're looking at doing is potentially outsourcing our writing of checks, and that may save us some money. And it's something that we've not wanted to do in the past, but it may save us some money. So, you're going to do some things. sometimes referred to as like kitchen counter budgeting, kitchen table budgeting, what you do in real life when you figure out, is there any way we can do things in a smarter way? And we're definitely going to be in that world where we're going to be doing things in a smarter way. And that's not bad. That's a good thing. That's something that could be a positive outcome of having to really look hard at what are you spending your money on.
Yeah, I'll just add that Illinois is a very similar place in terms of pensions, but because we're talking to young political leaders, the example I frequently give is people with student loan debt. I know friends that have been unemployed and they're happy because they get a deferral on their making their payments, or maybe they're on an income-based plan and they're not paying that much. That's what Illinois, and I'm guessing Kentucky, did for years. We said, oh, we don't have to make our full pension payment or our full student loan payment. Maybe we can make half because we don't have the income. What you find is the interest continues to accrue. And I know people who graduated with $100,000 in debt, and they went through the Great Recession, and they went a few years either not making interest payments or making income-based lesser payments, and they're now sitting on $200,000 in debt. It's the same problem with our pensions. We didn't make annual required pension payments. Their debts continue to grow, and they've gotten bigger and bigger. And now in Illinois, I think our pension contribution for this year is about $10 billion. The chickens have come home to roost, and they're not done.
Let's talk a little bit about federal government. So members of Congress are back in town working on the next large-scale coronavirus relief package. This question's kind of twofold. What support from the federal government have you seen so far? And beyond that, what support would you like to see, or rather, what does your state need from the federal government? Treasurer Ball, let's start with you.
Well, I have already said one thing I really think is important right now is reopening the economy as quickly, as safely as possible. So I'm always looking for ways that help improve that. And some of that is like regulatory changes, things that just help businesses to be able to be operational. One of the things that you're hearing right now that, I'm an attorney by background, so I pay attention to this. One of the things you're talking about is putting in some protections in for liability when people go back to work, so that way businesses can be operational without a fear of being sued for something that's probably not fair or realistic given the world that we live in right now. So I think those are things to be looking for and looking to help as we reopen the economy, because we have to do that. I've told you these unemployment numbers in Kentucky, and they're scary all over the country. So we have to think about, how do we normalize things? How do we reopen? How do we get things back on track? So I would be looking for those things from the federal government right now. Those are ways that they can be impactful towards the reopening, which is the thing that we most need right now. We do know, like I've already referenced, we do know some things that the White House and the Republicans have laid out that they want to see. And so they're going to go to the negotiating table with the Democrats, and they're going to come up with some kind of solution on this. But we do know some things coming from them, that there's going to be some state fund dollars, most likely. We know some funds are going to go towards education. We know these things are coming out there. We know that there's probably going to be some unemployment dollars that are going to be coming out. There's probably going to be another stimulus payment going out. So we know those things are coming, and it'll be interesting to see in the next few weeks what actually happens and how we can deal with that. I do know there's a lot of pushback from the extra $600 that people were receiving in unemployment, because it was creating in some areas a situation where people didn't want to go back to work because they were making more money. And there's a real push not to do that again. And I think that's smart. You don't want to create an artificial world where people are not going back to work because it's more profitable not to. My brother's in law school right now, and he's been working in a law firm part-time because he can do that as a law student. And he got unemployment because he wasn't able to continue working in his job. And then he said he realized he was actually making more. So, you don't want that kind of situation where you have that. So I think those are things we need to be mindful of in the next few weeks, and it's going to be interesting to see what comes down the pike.
Yeah, I think the federal government has been good so far. In a previous CARES Act, it provided money for states that was for specific COVID-related expenses. It came with a lot of strings attached. And that was fine. A lot of our initial expenses were healthcare related. So what I think would be helpful is some of those strings were now loosened, as we've seen a decrease in revenues, as you've seen restaurants and bars and hotels either shut down or effectively shut down. That's been a decrease in wages, income taxes coming in, or sales taxes coming into the state. And so there's very much a need out there that's COVID related that's not directly for testing or hospital expenses. But even if they removed all those strings, the state's already spent a lot of money on those things. I think there's going to be a need for additional revenue to come in, or you're going to see very dramatic cuts. And some people might say that you got to live within your means. You have to do that. But I think that this would be devastating for our economy. And this is not just me, and this is not a partisan answer. Last week on a treasurer's call, we had Ben Bernanke, former head of the Fed, Republican, appointed by a Republican, came out and said one of the mistakes of the last recession, the states cut their way out of this. It resulted in dramatic increases in unemployment that prolonged the recession, and recommended that we learn from that mistake. So I think that another thing that the federal government can do is, not to take care of all our pension problems, not to make sure that we have surpluses for a rainy day, but make sure that states are able to be made whole for some of the costs associated with going into shutdown mode to limit the spread of COVID. I think also money was made available in terms of loans through the Fed, but I think you saw businesses able to access that money at a lower interest rate than state governments. And quite frankly, I think the state governments who have the ability to raise taxes are a much safer investment than businesses that might be shedding their shedding money, or their economies might be shutting down. So I think there's some changes the federal government could make to be helpful to states and local units of government there as well, in terms of providing lower cost access to capital.
On the subject of reopening, safe to say it's been a little bit of a bumpy road. With, we're seeing COVID-19 cases increasing in several states across the country. Could you speak to the reopening in your state, and namely, what has happened so far? How did the economy react? And what's next, to the extent that you know or can speak to that? We've already said there's a ton of uncertainty, and who can ever say for sure, but curious to pose that question. Treasurer Frerichs, let's start with you.
Great. I'd say the economy will not work until the virus is contained and well managed. So we can talk about reopening, but as you saw now, some states reopened, and they've had to go into some form of shutdown. The states that reopened early have shut down bars, have shut down restaurants, or what you've seen is, because it's not really contained and well managed, people have been reluctant to go out. You can open it up, but I have lots of friends who refuse to go out and eat at a restaurant, or refuse to go to a gym. So, that I think is the best thing we can do. We can't snap our fingers and make it happen overnight. It's serious about containing and managing this virus. And that's why I feel we need the federal government to provide stimulus funds through things like expanded unemployment insurance benefits, so that people aren't rushing back into work because they're losing money. And direct aid to businesses. You cannot reopen the economy if people are not, or do not feel safe participating in that economy. The only way to reopen the economy is to have a strong, effective public health response. And until that happens, we need to continue to support people and businesses financially. So in Illinois, we are currently in phase 4. We had initial hotspot in Chicago, but we clamped down pretty hard. Phase 4 essentially means non-essential businesses, track customers, whether it be bars, restaurants, gyms. They can operate inside with limited capacity. But Chicago just this week walked back parts of phase 4, no longer allowing bars with no food service to do business indoors. They're limiting class sizes at gyms and other measures. Other areas in Illinois are on a verge of taking similar action. And I'd say the bottom line is, we all need to wear masks, we need to wash our hands, and we need to try very hard to keep our distance from other people to stop the spread of the virus.
Treasurer Ball.
Yeah, and I think we are probably going to be in this for a while. I don't think there's any indication that we're going to have any kind of a vaccine before the end of this year, perhaps early next year. Hopefully, end of this year. We are starting to see some positive information about a new vaccine coming. So we know this virus is here, and it's going to be here for a little while longer. With that being the case, we have to figure out, how do we do this as safely as possible? How do we help the economy, but be as safe as possible, given just the reality where we're at right now? And whenever you can have businesses be operational, that starts to create more good health in the economy. It just creates more possibility of people being off unemployment. So you just got to be smart about it. It's a balance. You know, economics is about consequences. It's about balancing things. And I think one way to be really smart about it is just do targeted reopening. You know, figure out if there's areas that have very, very low infection rates, you know, have it be tailored to that particular area. I'm from Eastern Kentucky, and an area like that hasn't had a lot of infection rates. It's rural, it's hard to get to. So if you can help the economy there, you know, let things open up there, that'd be great. You know, that you can do things in a targeted kind of way. But, you know, it's a balance. You want to be as smart as you possibly can. I think you want to have the goal of both. You want the health goal of protecting people. That's absolutely got to be a commitment. And you want the health goal economically. And so you just be as smart as you can. I think you can be tailored. I don't think it has to be always a blanket response that goes for the whole state. I think sometimes that's the wrong way to do it because you end up penalizing certain areas that don't really need to be penalized. It's not a one size fits all. And so that would be my advice is let's not look at this as a one size fits all, and also understand the reality of this is a virus that's here. It actually is here, and it's going to be here for a little while longer, at least until the end of the year, until the beginning of next year, until we've got a vaccine. So it's a bit of a waiting game, and you just try and normalize things as much as you possibly can, protect people as much as you can, and just be wise about it. But at the same time, you have to figure out how do you help the economy? How do you keep things operational? And I've loved what I've seen that's been innovative coming from people. We have a small bakery here in Frankfort, Kentucky, and you know, it's not a chain, it's one shop. And they've been tremendously innovative, and they've actually been more successful during this time because they've figured out cookies that kids can decorate and teach people how to decorate cakes, and you buy packages. So they've just been clever. I think every week they've had a different theme. So you can do like a graduation theme, you can do a Tiger King theme. You know, they do all these different things. And I love to see something like that because they've not been shut down. They're still operational, and they're being innovative because they're responding to what is the reality of the situation. So, you know, be innovative and responsive to the reality of the situation, but keep going at the same time. So that's what I would say. We have a bourbon industry here in Kentucky we're kind of known for, and it's been interesting and exciting to see the bourbon industry has switched over to antibacterial soap, and they're doing a lot of that. Castle and King makes gin, and I saw a Castle and King antibacterial soap the other day. So I love to see that it's the reality where we are. We're in a different world right now, but we can be innovative, we can be responsive, and I think that's the way we all need to be.
Thank you. So the last question we have before maybe we turn things over to some questions that the audience submitted, really want to focus though on how can states grow their economies and what are your priorities moving forward, given all of the challenges that we have just discussed. Treasurer Ball, let's start with you.
Sure, and I think I've actually kind of already answered somewhat that question about, you know, how do we go forward? How do we grow things? But I would like to say a little bit about what I've been trying to do myself here in this particular time. And I've mentioned it somewhat, the unclaimed property part of my office, but it's the lost and found, it's the statewide lost and found. And I've really tried to pump that up and make sure that I'm giving that money back to people and making it easy for people to file claims. We've actually been trying to be innovative in our office. So how do we streamline it? How do we make it easier? We've made some internal regulatory changes to help be responsive to that. And we're trying to come up with better ways to do it. So again, this is a time for innovation and creativity and being responsive to the reality of the world. And once we come through this, some things we're going to benefit from because we will have thought through it. We will have been smarter. So that's something that I'm proud of in my office. We've really focused on that, making sure we're getting those funds back to people. The able accounts, the stable accounts, we've actually seen a jump in those during this time because some people have seen this as a time that they've wanted, if they've had extra funds, some people they've wanted to invest. So there's always some opportunities in the midst of challenges, and those are some opportunities in the midst of challenges right now that we found in our office that we're trying to utilize and make the most of. So it's a crazy time, it's a scary time, it's a dangerous time, but I do believe that there's room for hope and innovation and being responsive, and that's what I'm trying to do within my office.
Treasurer Frerichs. Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, I think I muted myself there. Yeah, I think in order for states to grow their economies moving forward, we need investment. States need immediate grants from the federal government. This will help keep state and local governments operating and providing essential services and maintaining employment. And it can also spur additional investment. I'd say Illinois and many other states are in dire need of infrastructure investment. I don't know if that will come out of this or not. We need investment in green technology, clean energy. It can help spur economic growth. Now is the time to look at that. And this type of investment is essential to our environment and will provide good jobs that will grow and develop as an industry. Clearly, we also need to invest in our public health and medical infrastructure as well. Beyond the pandemic, we have seen the clear need for community health workers, including mental health. The lack of these investments has been revealed in the disparate impact of COVID in communities of color and communities of limited means. Healthy people are able to work, innovate, and contribute to their communities. Investments in health and community wellness will help our people and therefore our economy to thrive. But in the Treasurer's Office, we know that there are a lot of things we need. I say an awful lot of what the federal government doing or state government doing, but we're not without tools in our toolkits. And as the Chief Investment Officer in Illinois, I know I've heard stories from small businesses that are struggling. We've heard them all around the country. They need help paying bills, paying rent, paying their employees. And so we have in Illinois a linked deposit program, business linked deposit program. That means we link deposits we make in local banks with loans they make to businesses. And so very early on, a few months ago, we created the Illinois Small Business COVID Relief Loan Program. So we put money into banks at a near zero interest rate, 0.01%. So we're barely making anything off of this. We're not losing money, but we're doing this so that in turn, the banks can make low interest loans to businesses that have been struggling. Businesses that were once profitable, we have every reason to believe will be profitable again sometime in the future, but right now they're over troubled waters. And we're doing is helping to build a bridge between that time before when they were profitable and that time they will be in the future, so they don't drown in the meantime. We know that it's difficult to ramp up a struggling business, but that's easier than having to restart a shuttered business. We don't want businesses to close down, so we're hopefully through these low interest loans, providing them some sort of lifeline.
Well, thank you so much. I can't believe it, but I think that actually that might conclude our discussion. We have somehow come up on an hour, unless there are any concluding thoughts that either of you have to share. But I have so enjoyed our conversation. Treasurer Ball, Treasurer Frerichs, thank you for your time today and for sharing such important and timely information with us. Thanks also to those of you who joined us online. For more information on future virtual town halls and ACYPL programming, please follow us at ACYPL on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Finally, I'd like to take a moment to note that as our exchange work transitions to virtual engagement during the COVID-19 pandemic, it is vital that we measure the impact of the virtual town hall series for our funding partners. To do this, we ask that audience members complete a brief exit survey. Zoom attendees can access the survey link on the Zoom post attendee screen and will also receive the survey in an email tomorrow. Viewers on Facebook Live and YouTube can find the survey link in the video description on the respective platform. But with that, thanks again to our speakers and to those of you who tuned in today. We're really grateful for your support and we look forward to seeing you here again soon. So thanks again and take care, everybody.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Thanks, Treasurer.
Bye.
Everybody. Bye-bye.